So, welcome back to Tara Institute. My name's Damien, and I'm leading this month's Monday nights. And my general topic has been this statement that Buddhism can be summed up that the practice of Buddhism is loving kindness, and the philosophical view of Buddhism is dependent origination. So far we've mainly been looking at the practice of loving kindness. So loving kindness is basically love and compassion. And so love is the wish for somebody to be happy, somebody who lacks happiness, the wish for them to be happy. And compassion is for somebody who is suffering, the wish that they be free from suffering. So we can look at those statements and we can sort of think that love and compassion is basically for the benefit of others. So both of those statements are involved in looking at the condition of others. And based on some sort of warm affection from me, that's why I'm interested in these people, so sort of some sort of warm affection towards people is essential for me to have love and compassion. So based on that warm affection for others, then I see that they lack happiness and I want them to have happiness, and I see that they are enduring suffering and I want them to be free of that suffering. So we can have a thought that the benefit of love and compassion is basically for others. And to some degree in the Buddhist texts and scriptures, that's the presentation. And so you might have the question, well, is there a benefit for me in this process? And so part of the explanation is that from our own experience, if we generate love and compassion for others, then our own experience itself, we can see the benefit for ourselves of love and compassion for others. And so for that reason, it's almost unnecessary to state that there is a benefit for me in generating love and compassion. So there's several instances of this in the Buddhist scriptures where, like, the benefit of meditation for yourself, or the benefit of generating love and compassion, to some degree is almost unstated, because our own experience will immediately tell us that it's beneficial for us. So as a result, most of the Buddhist scriptures and texts mainly talk about the benefit for others by us generating love and compassion, because sometimes we might generate a lot of love and compassion for others but feel that there's no benefit. We can't see the benefit. Or we might feel that we've failed, or we might feel that it's inconsequential or insufficient, or but so a lot of the Buddhist scriptures are really trying to encourage us to accept that there is great benefit in generating love and compassion for others, and that there is a benefit for them. So, because the benefit for us is immediate and proven by our own experience. So that's something to think about. Generating love and compassion for others, and then the benefit for oneself. So this general question about the benefit for oneself relies, if we think about the body, there's my body and there's my mind. And so we can say there's a happiness of the body and there's a happiness of the mind. And the happiness of the body, good health, we are quite expert in understanding health care, good diet, exercise, good living conditions, clothing, you know, everything, medicines. So we're quite skilled at the well-being of the body. And the well-being of the mind, though, I think there's a big gap in our knowledge and practice of the well-being of our mind. And the essential point to recognise here is that the total responsibility for the happiness of my mind rests with me. You know, that I am totally responsible for the happiness of my mind. So we have to think about how can I, you know, how do I progress in improving the happiness of my mind? So the main way that we can do that is developing some level of introspection, so that if I'm unhappy, I may have a strong tendency to blame some external condition. You know, I might be very quick to blame my partner or my work or the politics or the, you know, lots of different circumstances. But what Buddhism encourages us to do is to say that the external condition, we have very little power to change the external condition, but the actual essence of my mental happiness is what's happening in my mind, in my own mind. So we're encouraged to look internally and to try to see exactly what is happening in my mind, so that in my mind I will have some thought or some object, and I am perceiving that object or that appearance, that cognition. I'm perceiving it in a certain way, and the combination of me engaging in that object in that certain way produces an unhappy experience for me. So this process is actually happening to us all the time, and most of the time it's invisible for us. And so in meditation we're encouraged to try to develop this skill where we can turn our attention internally and try to cognize, like with a self-awareness, what is the object, you know, that is in my mind? You know, how am I characterizing that object, and how am I experiencing that object? And to try to look at that process of what is the object that I'm holding in my mind, and what is the mode with which I'm holding it. So to try to make some sense of what that language is trying to mean, you know, we can think that when I'm angry, if I'm angry at this person, you know, like Sandra, let's say for instance I'm angry at Sandra. You're right there, Sandra. So if I'm angry at Sandra, it's almost irrelevant about who Sandra actually is. But the Sandra in my mind, the conception that I have in my mind, there's some sort of construction in my mind related to maybe related to some incident or something that was said, or generally to some sort of fantasy or hallucination of creation by myself. But there's a perception. So the Sandra that is the object of my mind has particular characteristics. And by my mind holding those characteristics and then exaggerating the negative aspects, I then generate anger. And so the anger in my mind and the object to which I am angry are very related. And so the mind of anger that I have and the object that I'm holding, that pairing generates the feeling of anger in me, and and then, of course, the unhappiness that is associated with that. The actual experience of anger itself is unhappy. But it's important to recognise that although I call this object in my mind Sandra, it's not Sandra. To see that every time we have anger towards somebody or something, that it's actually the conception of that in my mind that is generating the anger, and the relationship between that conception and the actual person or the actual situation can be slightly related or totally unrelated, just complete disconnect, because it's my mind that is creating this this conception and an exaggeration of the aspects, and possibly just a total lie or a total misunderstanding. And it's on the basis of that that I then generate the anger. So the technique here is for us to understand that the issue for me is an internal issue, and to identify that there is a conception, and there are characteristics of that conception, and on the basis of the characteristics, I am generating initially dislike, just mere dislike, and then by a mental absorption into that dislike, I generate anger, and by persistent anger and repeated anger, I can generate hatred. You know, that process of an escalation of our feeling from mere dislike to severe dislike to anger and to hatred, you know, that's what happens when we continue to engage in the object. So probably the simplest technique that we can adopt to deal with this unhappiness. So I'm saying here that anger is an unhappy state. We're also saying that jealousy is an unhappy state, that an arrogant superior feeling is an unhappy state, that miserliness, pride, in excessive pride, you know, comparison pride, you know, where you're feeling superior to others, is an unhappy state. You know, that even dull-minded ignorance is an unhappy state, an undesirable state. So some of those we may feel that it's actually quite obvious that it's an unhappy state. You know, I think anger, it doesn't take much to look at your own anger and realise that it's physically an unhappy state. It's mentally an unhappy state. It's agitated and disturbing. It's more difficult for us to look at the lustful, desirous mind and see that that also is actually an unhappy state. So from a Buddhist point of view, the primary delusions or the primary afflictions that we suffer from are, you know, hatred and anger, that's, you know, one, and desire and ignorance. So they're the primary delusions or afflictions. And they're called afflictions because the consequence of them is suffering for me. Now, anger, I think we can quite clearly see that is you know, results in suffering. And ignorance, we can see that is also an unwelcome experience, or an unsatisfactory experience, being ignorant and not knowing. Desire and attachment is more difficult for us to see the faults of desire and attachment, because it has these aspects of excitement and bringing people together and you know, something engaging in that. But if we look at the actual state of mind in the situation of strong attachment, we can start to see that it is also a disturbed mind. So that practice then, that's for us, for me. When I look at others, and we start to say, okay, the mind of love and the mind of compassion. So we look at somebody, let's say somebody close to us, and we start to think, when in normal circumstances, we can see that they lack happiness, and so love is the mind wishing them to have happiness. And then similarly, we see that they're suffering, and so compassion is the mind that wishes them to be free of that suffering. So what Buddhism brings to this whole discussion is, what is it that the person is lacking in terms of happiness? What is the happiness that they are lacking? And what is the suffering that they are experiencing? So this is where the philosophical content of Buddhism starts to bring up all these different different groupings, different explanations of what happiness is possible, what happiness is possible. So when we say somebody lacks happiness, what is the happiness that they lack? And there are many, many different aspects to that. And then similarly, when we say that somebody is suffering, what is it that they are suffering? So when we then talk about the philosophical view of Buddhism is dependent origination. So the first type of dependent origination which I've spoken about is this is cause and effect. That an action that we do, that I engage in, an action that I engage in has an effect. And similarly, the circumstances that I find myself in, both my physical circumstances and my mental circumstances, that they have a cause. And so there's a relationship between cause and effect. And the Sanskrit word for this that we all know is karma. But the word karma actually means action. And so if I talk about an action, when I do an action, so I might have a motivation to do an action. I've got an intention. There's this person here, and I'm going to lie to them. I'm going to deceive them. And so I've got a motivation. I've got an object that I'm going to lie to. I've got an intention for why I'm doing it. And then I lie to them. And I see that they've believed the lie, and so I feel an accomplishment with having deceived them. So there's 4 aspects there. And so in my mind, I feel I have accomplished that action. So in the sort of the general terminology here, we call that a completed action. So that completed action will have a consequence. And the consequence, if I very, very briefly talk about karma and cause and effect. So for a strong action, the first result is called a throwing result. So we'll just put that to the side. The second result is that I create for myself a disposition to repeat that action. So I create an habituation to, in the future, to lie. By engaging in that action, I am habituating myself to create that same behaviour again. So the second result is called the result similar to the cause. And so it's got this aspect, first of all, that I create an habituation. And secondly, I will experience a result similar to the cause. So in the case of lying, the result that is similar to the cause is that I will be easily deceived by others. That's one result. And another result is that even when I tell the truth, people won't believe me. So that's another aspect of the result of lying. So these are worth thinking about. So when I say I will generate compassion for somebody, one of the types of sufferings that person is undergoing is that they have an accumulated collection of cause and effect that makes them prone to suffering. So in this example of lying, if I can see what that person has in their continuum, I may see that they have a collection of karmic actions, karmic results, or cause and effect in relation to lying. And so then I can see that person does not get believed. You know, that when they talk, people disparage them, or they don't believe them. That they find that person untrustworthy. And also that they have a tendency, they may have created a tendency that they then repeatedly lie. So the mind of compassion has compassion for that. That even though we might say, well, you know, even a judge in a court and all that can say this person is a compulsive liar and always lies. But the mind of compassion has compassion for that, for being in that situation, that person, through cause and effect, has created an environment for themselves where they have a strong tendency to lie habitually. And furthermore, everybody, or nearly everybody, doesn't trust a word that they say. And so to see that as actually a suffering, that is a suffering for that person. And so for us then to have compassion for that person because they are entrapped by their own previous actions and their own previous habituations. And so in this example of lying, to see that the person is suffering because of their own accumulated negativity. And so the mind of compassion, so instead of just sort of having compassion for the sick animal or the injured person or the victim of a crime or something, the mind of compassion from this point of view is through understanding the dependent origination of cause and effect, our compassion can actually become much broader and more extensive. Because, so for instance, in this example of lying, when we meet a person who is prone to lying, then we can see that through the results of their previous lying, one, they have the habituation to lie repeatedly, very easily to fall into the trap of lying. And secondly, they are experiencing the suffering of not being believed, of being possibly disparaged as being a habitual liar, having their reputation damaged by being an habitual liar, and even when they tell the truth, they are not believed These are consequences of habitual lying. So for us, the more we understand cause and effect, the more we can see that even though in general language we would say, well, you get what you deserve, you lie constantly, and so you've got what you deserve. But the mind of compassion can actually engage with that and see that cause and effect for that person is itself an object of compassion, and that the wish for them to be free of that suffering, even though we might recognise that it's their own cause. So this is an important part of the meditating on compassion, is to recognise that everybody is accumulating action, and often the consequences of my actions are mixed. Some actions are good, some actions are beneficial for others, but many actions are self-centred, and they're harmful. They're harmful to others, and they're harmful to myself. And so an important part of the mind of compassion is, in a way, irrespective of a judgment of good and bad, virtuous, non-virtuous, or whatever, irrespective of any judgment that we might make about the person, that the mere possession of that habituation, even though it is that person's own cause, it is their own prior actions and their own habituation, the mind of compassion is non-judgmental, non-conditional. Ideally, the mind of compassion is non-conditional, and so compassion is generated for that person. And it's generated on the superficial, or on the, not the superficial, but it's generated on the immediate condition of that person not being believed, being labelled a liar, finding that nobody trusts them, that's a condition. But also compassion for the person not understanding cause and effect. So ultimately we can have compassion for others in that they do not understand cause and effect. And because of that, they then suffer. And furthermore, we can have compassion for people that, on the basis of their strong self-grasping, self-cherishing mind, they've engaged in these behaviours, and so we can have compassion for them on the basis of them having a strong self-cherishing heart, let's say. Because on the basis of that self-cherishing, they then have engaged in these unskillful actions. So the progression of our compassion can change, or can deepen. The progression of our compassion can deepen on how much we understand cause and effect. So understanding the dependent origination of cause and effect can lead us to having a much deeper compassion. And then similarly, in some of the other aspects of dependent origination to do with how we actually conceive and perceive objects, and how we cognise the I, this sense of I. So some of the errors that we make in relation to this sense of I, that they are actually the root ignorance that causes us to engage in afflicted behaviour, in afflicted minds and afflicted behaviour. So we can have compassion for others in a way, no matter how bad the person is, because it's based on them not understanding cause and effect, not understanding what is beneficial for themselves, not understanding, for instance, that, you know, like if we really recognise that having the mind of love and compassion for others is actually the most beneficial thing that I can do for myself, you know. So we can have compassion for others because not understanding that, you know, somebody not understanding that a path of having love and compassion for others is actually the best path for yourself. So, you know, last week I talked a little bit about this sort of this quandary in a way that, you know, humans, we have a natural tendency towards love and compassion. I think it's quite fair to say that the human being is essentially a being whose life is based on altruism. And so the example that I've used is that each one of us, when we are conceived and when we are born, that if it wasn't for the kindness of others, we would not survive a day. So this is something to really think about, that we're not like some animals. You know, there's some animals, the day they're born, they're on their own and they're capable, you know, or they're laid as an egg and they pop up out of the sand and they're on their own and they go hunting for food and they're fine. Some of them are fine. They survive and they're on their own. Humans aren't like that. Humans have to be looked after for a long period of time, every day, to be protected and to be cherished and looked after. And so we can see that the human being is totally dependent on altruism. So I think we can sort of say then that the human being is, we embody love and compassion because it is so much part of our being, you know, which is important to recognise. So we have this, I think we ought, you know, you don't have to sort of do too much explanation, although the Buddhist definition of love is probably a little bit different to what the ordinary person in the street might say, but we understand the essence of love and compassion. For somebody close to us, we know what that means. So the question then becomes, why is it that in general in my life developing love and compassion takes a very back seat? You know, it's not high on my list of daily activities. So there's something, you know, here which Geshe Doga has been talking about recently, is this need for us, you know, because we have not totally familiarised ourselves with the value of love and compassion. We have not bothered to really familiarise ourselves with the value of love and compassion for others, and in particular love and compassion for, you know, for myself. Developing love and compassion, I have not familiarised totally for myself why that is so beneficial. And so, although we can say that the human being has this natural tendency towards love and compassion, the reality is that we have somehow turned our back on that, and we have become distracted, or we've become, we think, oh yeah, maybe on the weekend I'll do a bit of meditation and I'll generate try to generate some love and compassion for others, but at the moment I'm busy, you know, whatever the excuse is. We for whatever, you know, it's good to understand why is it that if I say that the human being is naturally loving and compassionate, because to survive we have to have love and compassion to survive even one day, but then in our actual behaviour we turn our back on love and compassion. So the solution to this is somehow we need to put in some effort to try to recollect the value of love and compassion as much as we can. So it's a good thing to try to think about why is it that, if you look at the world situation, you think every one of these people around the world totally dependent on the love and compassion of others to be alive. Totally dependent on the love and compassion of other people to be alive. Yet their behaviour and their thinking and their speech is totally devoid of love and compassion for others. So there's quite a disconnect. And we can see that manifest in all sorts of different ways, not just in wars and attacks and counterattacks and all this, not just in that, but even in normal life, we see it. This disconnect. So somehow within ourselves we have to develop a resolution and a behaviour to engage in and understand this. And being aware and meditating is a big part of this. So we'll do some meditation now. And can I ask, is anybody here for the very first time tonight? A few people? Oh, good. Well, welcome. Thanks. So a few more. Yeah, thanks for coming. So we can meditate and adopt a good posture, primarily keeping the back upright, and also I think sort of a symmetry in your body is good. And so just turn your attention inside your mind. Just turn your attention. Try to be aware of all of your thoughts. And we're going to meditate on the breath. So the breath just coming in, going out. And I'm going to ask you to focus on the awareness of the breath. So just that mental image of the breath coming in and going out. Some sort of ebb and flow of the breathing energy just coming in, going out. So let all of the thoughts go from your mind and put your attention just 100% on this sort of image, mental image of the breath coming in and going out. And just sit the mind on that experience. Just check your concentration. You can relax a little bit and just observe what happened in your meditation. So just identifying what happened in your meditation. If you were daydreaming or distracted, or thinking about yesterday or tomorrow or something outside, just recognize that. So let's repeat the meditation and start with a strong motivation. A strong motivation, thinking, you know, I would like to develop my love and compassion. And I can see that to be able to do that, I need to become aware of my thinking. I need to be aware of my attitudes towards others and my self-cherishing. So I need to be able to overcome that. So I need to develop the skills of mindfulness and alertness and self-awareness. I need to be able to develop this, and meditation will do that for me. So we can have that sort of motivation. And then with a strong determination, just repeat the meditation and endeavour 100% to keep your focus just on the breath, coming in, going out. So just relax your concentration again, and once again check what was happening in your meditation. So it's possible in meditation that the mind focusing on the breath and the breath, that the concentration can be such that it's like there's just one thing, that the mind focusing on the breath and the breath is so absorbed that it seems like it's indistinguishable. So not me observing the breath, but just the mind totally absorbed in the breath. So we can do that by just relaxing into the meditation and trying to reduce the sort of mental chatter or the mental discussion or mental analytical process. So good to try to stop any of that thinking and just allow the mind to be totally focused on the breath. So let's do another minute or two of meditation, trying to be totally focused just on that, the breath coming in and going out. Then just bring your mind back to the room. So we've got some time now for discussion or questions, so if anybody would like to share something or ask a question.
Mildly off topic. Are there, like, is the Dalai Lama, for instance, considered an enlightened individual? Like, is the sort of thread of enlightenment meant to have continued, or was there a time that was, like, severed? I'm just, like, curious.
Yeah, so the question is whether, in general, do you think there's an enlightened being? Do you say, is that one thing you're asking?
Living like enlightened being today, is there someone who sort of qualifies for that same sort of, enlightenment that was supposed to be less?
Yeah, so the state of enlightenment is irreversible. That's one thing to sort of accept. This is not generally something I'd talk about particularly, but let's say there is enlightenment is possible. So the Buddha is an enlightened being, and so the continuum of that is not severed by death, or not reversed by death, or deteriorated by death. In fact, death is irrelevant to that being. I, for instance, would believe that the Buddha is still present in a way, that we are still living in the time of the Buddha. I think, the fact that this class is taking place, I would see this as evidence that the Buddha is still active in a way, with the teachers that we have and all this. Anyway, so then your other question is about the Dalai Lama. So, like, I believe that the Dalai Lama is an enlightened being, but I have no proof for that, none whatsoever. But my perception is that. And I've seen this with many lamas, or like teachers. An ordinary being is absolutely not capable of the behaviour of somebody like the Dalai Lama. And my own observations are, in particular, with even the local teacher and the local teachers and other lamas that I've met, is the ability to engage with a person 100% on what that person needs, and then to engage with another person 100% on what that person needs in a totally different manner, in a totally different language and interaction and way of dealing with people. My perception is that that's not possible as an ordinary person. Now, what sort of level of skills they've got is a different question, but I think the first point to sort of recognise is that they're not ordinary, so how far you want to consider that non-ordinariness is sort of up to you, but that's my view, that by examination, I can see with the Dalai Lama that he is not ordinary. There's no way you can be like that as I'm an ordinary being. It's not ordinary capability. But I don't know if that answers your question. Yeah. Yeah, so let's say like in the road rage situation, the question is, what manner of technique can we use? So part of this process is to fully convince yourself of the disadvantage of anger, right? And so you have to do that prior to the circumstance, you know, because generally in the circumstance we do not recollect the disadvantage of anger when we're really angry. We do not, you know, that's the problem, is that the mind of anger is so enveloping that I'm not able at that moment to see the disadvantage of anger. So we, in a way, we have to prepare ourselves to cultivate a recognition of the disadvantage of anger, so that when that circumstance presents itself to us, I reject my habituation towards anger. So, because we may have a strong habituation to anger, so we have to cultivate an habituation towards patience, or an habituation towards love and compassion. You know, that's also an antidote to anger. So, in the moment, if the anger has arisen, it's very difficult to counteract the anger in that moment, right? So the thing is, we can go one step earlier, and the perception of the incident. So the perception of the incident is that I am perceiving a great insult or a great slight or a great disadvantage to myself, right? I'm perceiving that. So we can overcome that perception by, again, several methods. And the recognition that whatever circumstances has arisen, that in some manner, I have created that cause. And the one way I can think that I have created that cause is because my mere perception of it as being a really unworthy circumstance, or an unsatisfactory circumstance, that, you know, in a way, the circumstance itself we can think of as maybe it's neutral, but I am perceiving it as an unsatisfactory circumstance. So if we're able to question my perception of it as being so terrible, you know, is that really true, that this is so terrible? Because sometimes in hindsight you'll see that you got really angry at something, and then in retrospect you think it was a bit of a storm in a teacup. I got things out of perspective there. I really overreacted. I completely misperceived the circumstance. So to understand that my perception of the circumstance as unsatisfactory is the key basis for developing anger. And that's a really important thing. Now, in general, our perceptions, we don't have the awareness that I am making that judgment. You know, I'm actually making the judgment that this is unsatisfactory. And on the basis of it being judged unsatisfactory, I then generate anger. So if we can go that one bit earlier to the perception of the unsatisfactoriness and somehow soften that judgment. And so the way we can do that is to start to understand the self-cherishing mind that is totally interested in my own, you know, my agenda is number one. You know, I am number one. I'm the center of my universe. And so as a result, you see a whole lot of stuff as unsatisfactory because you're placing yourself in the center of the universe. And everything is in relation to me, you know, me. So that's another key aspect, is this self-cherishing, self-centered mind generates the perception of circumstances as being unsatisfactory because I'm judging them as being unsatisfactory to this strong sense of I. So if we can weaken that sense of self-centeredness, then we won't get angry because we won't perceive circumstances as unsatisfactory to me. You know, like there's a relationship between this self-centeredness and my perception of something as unsatisfactory, to really understand that relationship. And so if we have a very strong self-centeredness, there's a good chance we see nearly everything as unsatisfactory. You know, like we can never be happy because there's just nobody is good enough, nothing is good enough. You know, even when somebody does something for you, you're not happy with the way it's done, and you abuse the person because it wasn't done well enough or quick enough or, you know, with the right respect and honour to me. You know, like there's so many things we attach into that, and we see something as unsatisfactory. So that sort of sense of unsatisfactoriness, to recognise that that's driven through this self-cherishing mind. And then if we can cut it off there, that's really good. But then if the anger develops, to have really convinced yourself that anger is no value to you. No, you know, so then you really try to apply an antidote to the anger. Right? And so then even before the self-centeredness operates, you know, to really understand the nature of reality is another antidote to sort of seeing the way that these circumstances develop, and particularly that mind of unsatisfactoriness, and then on the basis of that we generate anger or we generate jealousy or something else. You know, there's this whole sequence, and so we have some options early on, but when we're totally absorbed in anger, we don't have a lot of options at that moment, you know. So, yeah. In what regard? Okay, so your question is about like developing compassion for somebody who's a chronic liar and the circumstances of that. Yeah. Well, so so the question is, what's the value of that? Yeah. So there's a couple of points there, and I totally agree with you that your love and compassion for somebody else does not change their behaviour. That does not change their behaviour. And they may not recognise it. So is that a problem? All right, so there's an underlying question about agenda. So do you think that generating love and compassion for others is based on an agenda of wanting to change them?
I don't know, I'm just thinking if it's that obvious. Like in the example you gave, everyone can see it's a problem and then no one believes them.
Yeah.
Then by you seeing it as well, but them not seeing it, is that enough? Or is that what
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So what do you think the solution is to that? It's a problem there. There's a problem, isn't it? Okay. So, look, from a Buddhist point of view, what we're doing here is we're recognising a reality that, in the case of that chronic lying situation, we're recognising that the person is, through previous actions, they have an habituation towards lying, and as a result they are creating that future habituation, and they're also creating a really unwelcome circumstance for themselves in that nobody believes them. Even when they tell the truth, the people don't believe them, and there's a sort of a widespread view of them being a chronic liar, and which is disadvantageous to the person. Okay, so this leads to the idea of an aspiration to benefit others. So love and compassion is of benefit to others because you are no longer harming them. And if the opportunity is there, you will try to benefit them. But the bigger picture is, certainly from a Buddhist point of view, is recognising that I am almost incapable of helping that person at the moment. And so you can start to think, what skills would I need to be able to actually help this person? So the line of that reasoning then produces this, the mind, what's called the mind of bodhicitta, the mind that recognises that the only way to really benefit others is actually to develop the skills and the qualities of a fully enlightened being. That as an ordinary person, I am really limited in what I can do for somebody. Like in that example, I can do nothing, But having compassion for them is really beneficial, because it will prevent you from adding to their suffering by criticising them and disparaging them. It will make you engage with that person in a loving and compassionate manner, and even despite them maybe lying to you, you will actually show them affection and kindness, which is beneficial for them. It may not cause them to stop lying, but that kindness is beneficial. And for yourself, you do not have resentment and anger and dislike for the person. You actually only have warmth for the person, which is beneficial to you as well. So, but to actually change somebody else is not easy. It is not easy. Yeah.
Where would the bit of tough love come in there? Tell them straight how it is. When you're not doing them any favours,
Yeah.
not letting them go, and really they might like you for that, and they might resent you, but hopefully your motivation is that they will turn inward and reflect on
So,
their behaviour.
It's a very wishful thought. Yeah. So the question is tough love. So in the case of, so-called tough love, for that person, is it easy for them to distinguish between tough love and just naked criticism? They can't tell. They can't tell whether it's tough love or it's just another person criticising them for lying out of hatred, So one of the points to sort of recognise here is that tough love, so-called tough love, whatever, is the only way the so-called tough love can work is if the action is so skillful that it's at the right moment, in the right manner, for the right person and the right circumstances. And so to actually apply tough love, you need to be incredibly skillful. But generally, for the person, let's say that they're everybody recognising that they're a chronic liar. Let's say that is actually tough love. They won't perceive it that way. They will not perceive it that way. So that's why tough love actually requires an incredible skillful action. But from a story that Geshe-Doga told once about this type of circumstance, and his quote was, "Nobody misunderstands kindness." And I think that's something really to keep in mind, that so here in this circumstance, generating compassion for that person and then showing them kindness, showing them that you are not disparaging them, you are not getting angry, you're not getting disturbed, showing them kindness. No matter how chronic a liar they may be and how bad their issue is, they will not misunderstand kindness. And that's a really important thing to recognise. So tough love is a path that is reserved for very special beings to do it well. I think in general you have to say that. So.
What about
Can you give an example of what you mean, idiotic compassion?
If somebody's needs to be spoken to about a particular behaviour, and idiotic compassion sometimes can be somebody saying, "Oh, don't worry, it's all right, everything's fine," where kind truth-telling to the person is a skillful way of communicating to somebody.
So is your issue with the person who is showing idiotic compassion? Or, yeah. Well, look.
Because it's not sincere. It's coming from a sense of sincerity, but there's no wisdom there to go along with it.
Yeah, look, maybe the example needs a little bit more discussion, but I think, let's say in the example of the person that's the chronic liar, understanding cause and effect can be a basis on which we have compassion for that person. We have compassion for that person based on the fact that they have accumulated an habituation through not understanding what right action is or not understanding cause and effect, and so they have accumulated this condition and they are suffering from both the habituation and hence repeating their problems, but also suffering from the result similar to the cause, meaning that they are disbelieved and they are lied to. So they experience that situation of being lied to as well. Look, I think we'd have to sort of define what an idiotic compassion is, because I think anybody feeling compassion for that situation and that circumstance, it's still valuable in being compassion. Like an example would be in Bodh Gaya. One thing in India you see you see a lot of beggars and poor people, and there's a lot of people would run around trying to deal with the beggars and sort of hand out meals and all this. And at one point the Dalai Lama had said to somebody who was asking about it, he said, it might be better to have compassion for the businessmen, because the one thing about the beggars is that the beggars are exhausting their previous negative actions by suffering now. They are exhausting their previously acquired negative actions and the suffering from that. So by suffering, they are exhausting that karma. Whereas the business people who are deceiving and cheating and ripping off the tourists, etc., or whatever, are accumulating negativity that will manifest in the future. And so the Dalai Lama sort of just passed a comment, partly just to trigger people's thinking and saying, you should actually have compassion for the business people, because they are creating their own future suffering, whereas the beggars are exhausting their past negativities. So their situation is actually a lot better than the business people who are creating a future suffering. So normally we would never have compassion for that person, the rich person, because we don't see it as suffering. But by understanding cause and effect, we can have compassion for people who are creating the cause of their future suffering. And we can have compassion for people who are experiencing the effect of their past actions. So the beggar sleeping in the street and eating the slops from the rubbish bins and all this sort of thing, we can have compassion for them because they are experiencing a suffering that is due to their past actions. But the other person, who we perceive as really successful and all that, is actually possibly creating future suffering, and we should have compassion for that. And generally we don't, because we don't understand it. We don't understand this relationship between cause and effect. So, I watched a video of somebody observing the eclipse in the US, and they were very upset. They were very disturbed, and I'm thinking, is that a sign of the education system in the US that somehow the person really was thinking something's gone wrong with the universe? Like not understanding what the eclipse was or what it meant or anything, and just really, really disturbed by it. So you can have compassion. You can have compassion for that person, but really that compassion is because of their ignorance, and they are suffering because of their ignorance. But it's sort of almost amusing, in a way that somebody can suffer from something that a little bit of education would completely relieve any issue for them. And so, but still they're suffering because of that. So, not quite the idea of idiotic compassion, more like compassion for the idiotic, but still, Anyway, shouldn't say that. All right, it's getting late, so let's dedicate. So just think, very valuable for us all coming together and meditating together. And so imagine that you absorb all of that benefit, and then just think of people close to you and just feel that you are giving them this benefit. You can do that by visualizing rays of light going out from you and to every living being. Even to the people who recently departed us. I think we give the benefit to them. They receive the benefit of us all coming together. And that it brings them happiness and a freedom from suffering. So like this, we can imagine all living beings, some benefit going to all living beings. And then absorb that light back into yourself. Imagine that light comes back and dissolves into yourself. All right, so thank you very much, and we'll see you next week, hopefully. So, and there's some tea and cake and stuff. There's some cake up in the dining room. If you're able to stay and have a chat, that'd be great. Thank you.